Alright, I'm going to show you how to model an electronic cigarette. It's called the Wismec. Now, you can find the reference images on the website. Right now, I'm going to set the project. So, go File, Set Project, and then create a folder, and then create a default workspace for it. Next, we're going to go to Project Window and put that in the same place where our workspace is. By doing this, it'll create a bunch of folders for us. Now I'm going to Save Settings and enable incremental save in the general options. This means every time we save, it'll create a new file for us, so just in case anything goes wrong, we can always go back. Alright, so now we're going to create image plane, so go to Create Image Plane. We're going to do this 3 times with the top, front and side view of our reference images. Now the front and side view, we're going to use mainly for scale, since they're the most accurate images, since they're from the manufacturer website. The top view, we're only going to use that for the shape of the model, since it's taken manually and wouldn't be as accurate as the manufacturer images. So once you have your image planes, just click the folder, select the images. Alright, now we're actually going to start modeling, so we're going to start off with a cube. And now if you go into layout, selecting the different panel, now we're going to start off from the front view. Now we're just going to line up the cube with the actual model. Alright, select the wireframe shading mode just so you can actually see the edges of your model. Line these up all the way to the top, don't worry about the curves on the sides and at the bottom, since we'll sort that out right at the end. Now, the problem I was having here was that the camera view was set to side and not left. That's what you want to make sure. So make sure for your left image, make sure it's set when looking through the camera to the left view and not the side view. Right, we're gonna add loops here. My hotkey for this is K, but for you, you'd probably just want to press connect. You can change the hotkeys in the settings under hotkey manager. Now we're just gonna line up the top image. Now making sure that's 90 degrees exactly, so it's completely flat. And now I'm just gonna line the image up with the model. We're not lining the model up with the image because that will make the model inaccurate in size. Now also, we only need to model about half the image. You don't need to do the entire thing, because we're going to use a mirror modifier later on and mirror the entire model exactly on the opposite side. So once you've lined up the image, we can start actually modeling. Alright, select vertices, and we're just going to bring these in, pressing Control Shift. When we press Control Shift, that does the slide. Now we're going to create loops horizontally, and we again select vertices and pressing Control Shift again, just bring them inward and align them towards the model. We're going to add some loops at the bottom and one vertical loop. Now we're adding more loops just so we have a smoother curve and it's more of an arc rather than a jagged edge. Now again, Control Shift, just keep moving these to the side and line them up properly, as proper as you can. Now the vertical loop, it does not need to be curved. We're going to try and keep it straight as possible, This being, we'll get better edge flow. And why do we want better edge flow? Because when we UV and wrap our model, having straight lines is always easier, and on top of that, having straight lines generally means better normals. And when we have better normals, that means we have more accurate reflections on our model. And especially since our model is almost glossy, we need accurate reflection, so we're going to try and keep as best edge flow and topology as we can. Alright, now here we're just moving the model about, just making sure it's accurate to the images on the side and in the front view. Right, we're just going to select the bottom half of it and click delete, because we're just going to mirror that later on. And now just carry on, just trying to make this as accurate as possible to the reference images. I'm gonna select the edges here and add a loop, and then I'm just gonna select that edge, corner edge, and just bring it forward slightly, just so it lines up. I'll add a loop at the bottom and make it line up with the bevel over there. Right, we'll just bring these faces in just so they line up a little bit more in the left view and how far deep they should be in. Next, we're going to add some loops on the top edges and bring them down slightly, and then we're just going to bring them forward a little bit later, just so we have a better curve on the a smoother curve. Alright, I didn't like what I did there, so I'm just going to change it again. Just select them polygons and bring them in slightly. Try and match it as close as you can to the side view. Now just line this up slightly a bit more. You press 3 and go into the smoother view. You can see that it's too curved, meaning we need to add support loops to the edges. So if you press 1 again and go back to that view, select the following edges, and then we're going to bevel them. Doesn't matter if the topology is too bad on this, because we will fix it. I'm just trying to get the topology and the bevels correct. I just leave a couple of polygons here just for topology's sake. Now if you see here, we change it to edge, and now we have a nice clean topology all across the border. Now we're just going to clean this up a little bit more by deleting the edges that connect to vertices, and we're just going to use multi-cut from by selecting one vertex when it's red and clicking the edge, and that will give us another loop that's completely separate. Now that's better for topology, since now we have all quads in the top area. And now when we press smooth, we see we have a nice curve. As you can see here, I made a mistake and created an n-gon and an open loop. Now we're going to close this by clicking multi-cut and just cutting along the edge. Again, I did make some mistakes here and created extra vertices that were not needed, so I'm just going to clean this up. If you have extra vertices as well, just click the vertex and press Ctrl Delete, and that will remove the vertex. Right, now that I've fixed the topology, I'm going to create a bevel for that edge. So select the face, and then press Shift and double click it to select the entire loop. Then press Shift and right click and select bevel faces. And then just follow my settings over here on the bevel, and and that should do. We're gonna create add a couple more loops here. I'm just trying to figure out whether I want a hard edge or a softer edge. I think they should do fine. So I'm just gonna line these up a little bit more with the topology that I have. The next thing I'm going to do is create that little bottom edge over there that you see. So I'm going to add some loops and we're just going to line them up towards the image. Again, pressing Ctrl Shift and sliding it downwards. Along with the other ones, because if we leave it up, it won't be good for edge flow. So just try and keep it all. If you can move one vertex down, move the rest down. Think of it as like a ripple effect. We're also going to add a couple more loops here that go from the top to the bottom, just so we can keep with quads rather than tris. And then once we've done that, we're just going to extrude it inwards and then bevel the sides. Once that's been completed, select the faces, hold shift in the move mode, and then just move it inwards and click extrude. Next, select the same faces and bevel them, so we have a nice sharp curve on the edge, so we can maintain the shape that we just created. Now, one thing you'll notice, if you press 3 and go to the smooth mode, you'll see it's not kept its shape. That's simply because we did not have the bottom topology, and it's just curving inwards because there's nothing there to support it at the bottom. Once we mirror it, that will completely go away. Now we're ready to use symmetry, so we're just going to select the entire model, hold shift right click and then click poly mirror, and then we're just going to line these up. Again, making sure they're as close as possible. They're not going to be exact, but we can move it inwards after we've actually mirrored them. So we don't want that edge around the little curve that we just made. So we're just going to move the mirror closer to it so it welds together, and then we'll just move it down afterwards once it's welded. Now we're going to select the edges, and if you move to the bottom, we're just going to make this a bit more curved. Just move the edges up, again using Control Shift, make sure they're aligned properly to that curve. Again, can go into vertex and just move this up here because that is our curve and it wasn't exact. Right, the next area that we're going to make is that green area. So just add loops wherever you see fit and try and keep them in line with the image. So we're going to add a loop at the bottom for our bottommost area, moving the vertices up. And then we're also going to add a loop right on the side and every corner that we see, just so we have our bounds correct. Right, this area that you see here, that's an error of symmetry, so what you can do is just delete the edges or the vertices and then use multi-cut and connect them to the single edge on the side. Over here, this loop, I'm just going to try and keep it along the edge, and then the parts on the side, just try and keep good edge flow. Next, select all the faces in this area, and then we're going to bevel them. So when we bevel, we want to add loops along the sides, along the edge, and along both edges of the white area and the green area. And then the middle part, we're just going to bring inwards and have a nice curve, which will then act as our black area, since that seems to be shadow. Then also make some minor touch-ups if need be. Now select these edges and extrude them inwards. I do recommend using the extrude modifier rather than pressing shift, because that would make it more accurate, and we can do this as the entire polygon selection rather than per polygon. This will prevent any other errors when unwrapping. Right, now we're going to do the exact same for the other green area. We are just going to add loops and then try and make the exact shape that we need for this green area. And we'll also do the exact same when we bevel. We'll create a loop on the inside and a loop on the white area, and then extrude the middle part inwards so we have a shadow. Again, whilst doing this, I'm just going to make a few touch-ups to the other side and try and keep good topology and making sure of that by switching from the smooth view and the straight view and the normal view, and just making sure all my loops are proper and I can form with quads rather than tris. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is create them holes. So just make some loops along the horizontal plane, and then we're just going to line them up towards the image. made, detach it from the object and add some subdivisions, and that is as far as we're going to go. The rest of the actual circles will come from the textures. Next we are going to make the button, so again, very simply align it to a circle, extrude it outwards, and then just line it up so it looks like a button. And I will also bevel the edges so that when we smooth it, it doesn't flop down and it stays in shape. Alright, now that you made the button, you're going to make that screen. So just again line up the polygons and make it match towards the outer edge. And then once you've done that, we're just going to extrude it inwards and then bevel the edges at in the last part. Right, now moving downwards, we're going to make that circle. So again, just add some polygons and line them up towards the image. Then once we've actually made the circle, we're going to extrude it outwards, and then we're going to bevel the edges inwards so we have that nice depth to it. Right, now going to top view, we need to make that outer ring and them inner circles. First things first, we're going to start off with the outer ring and just move polygons around to fit the edges. Also, because our model is slight to the left and we're not going towards the top view representing any scale, we're also going to have to roughly eyeball the scale of the of how far left it is and how far we have to move it. We need to basically offset all our positioning and of the circle that we're going to make, because the model is to the left in actual scale from the front and left images. Again, just make sure bevel the edges, add some loops, try and make a nice smooth curve for it, and then same for the inner arcs as well. Do the same, model them, extrude it outwards, and then bevel it. Right, now that we've done this, we're just going to use symmetry in the opposite direction. Just line it up, make sure it's aligned properly, try and not have any topological defects, make sure everything's merged and welded. That inner part we're going to get rid of because it doesn't seem accurate to the image. The nail we're not going to do, we'll do that in the textures, and just making sure that this side part here is correctly done on the opposite side. Now we're just going to select this and add a AI standard surface material to it and call it holes. Then we're also going to select the screen area and then add a new material, standard surface, and call this screen. Now the rest of the model will have the standard material applied to it.
You'll never be mine. It is you. You'll never be mine. It is you. You'll never be mine. You'll never be mine. It is you. You'll never be mine.
Right, now that you've completed the modeling, we're going to start unwrapping the model. When I mean unwrap, I mean essentially putting the model into a 2D space so you can apply textures to it. So the way we're going to do this, we're going to click on UVs by holding the right click down, and if you see here in the UV editor, you'll get this jumbled mess. So first things first is I'm going to unwrap the sides of the model. These where the holes will be. So I'm just going to select these and click planar. And I'm going to do the exact same for the other side. Next we're going to unwrap the screen. So just select the edges and the entire screen area. I'm just clicking here on the faces and shift clicking all the way to the other side. And then just click planar. The problem with doing planar on this one is that it isn't very accurate, and it'll give us a lot of warping when we apply textures to it. So in this case we're going to use camera base by looking directly at it, and I'm zooming in here just to make sure none of the edges are folding in on each other. So that looks pretty accurate, and now we can start on the rest of the body. Now I'm going to do very simply, just click automatic and just let it unwrap whatever it sees. Now by doing this, it just makes it a little bit more simpler since everything's already split into pieces, and then we just need to connect it all together. The way we connect it all together is by clicking the edges, and if you go into cut and sew, we click sew together. Alright, now we're going to start on the top area, and now I just want to put these all together so I have a singular flat plane. So if you see here, what I'm going to do is, firstly I'm actually going to edit the topology and the actual model. I don't really like how that's not circle in the center, so I'm just going to edit it. You can do the same if you want, it doesn't really matter though. This is just, I didn't personally like it, so I'm just going to change it. Alright, so now that I've fixed up the model a bit, let me explain exactly what you're doing here. So the white areas, the white lines that you see, they're called seams, and that's where there's a cut within the texture. You ideally want to have as minimal seams as possible for your unwrap, because when you have seams, that means the texture won't follow through. For example, if I were to draw a line from one part, from the top of the UV space all the way to the bottom, everything that intersects, all the polygons that intersect that line will have the line shown on them, and those that don't won't. And if you want it to be a perfectly straight line that goes from the top of the model to the bottom, that means the entire UV has to be straight and all connected. I hope that makes sense. But essentially what we're going to do here is connect the entire top area. So from the bottom of from the top of the bevel on the edges all the way to these seams over here. So I've separated them out by faces, and now I'm just going to select the edges and then click stitch together, and that should get rid of the seams and connect them. You may see a little bit of a jumbled mess, but that's perfectly fine, because after we will just unfold them or straighten them out and then look perfectly reasonable then. Alright, now that you click unfold, that should be perfectly fine. Just make sure none of the edges and faces are overlapping on each other. So maybe just bring them in slightly in the UV space. But as you see here, we have a generally clean unwrap of the top of the model. Now we're just going to move on to the other. We'll start with the easiest parts and then move our way to the more difficult areas. Now, any white areas, again, just stitch them together. If you see a white area and it's not stitching it together, that may mean that your actual polygons aren't welded, or it may just be in the UV space. So you might want to test around for that. So essentially what we're going to do now is, from the back of the model, we are just going to create a seam that goes from the top to the bottom all the way at the back, so we have this nice cut when it unfolds outwards on either side. We are then also going to cut the screen out from the model and make it a separate object in itself. Same with the buttons, and then on top of that we are going to connect each of the side parts into a single area. So we'll have the top in the top of the model within the center of the UV space, and then both sides on the left and right side connected to the top, and then the front connected to the tip, and then the back of it, well, there shouldn't really be a back since it'll be on either side. So we'll essentially have a cross-like shape. Right, now you see here, I was just connecting the bevels on the inside of our green area. I don't really know what to call it, but the green area parts that we made. Just connecting the bevels up and bring them into a single circle, well, single flat plane, and then we're going to attach them to the main model, and then we'll use that later on for a good ambient occlusion map. Again, it's fine. The problem I had here, where you see it's not entirely across, is because I accidentally messed up the seams along the back area where it shouldn't be connected, but for some reason I connected it by mistake. So as you see here later on, I fix it completely, so we have the bottom, back, top, and both sides opened out in an almost perfect cross, which is exactly what you want to minimize seams. Alright, if you haven't done so already, you now just need to unwrap the actual buttons. So essentially what we're going to do here is just click the circles and then scale them up a little bit, and then just unwrap it into a perfect circle. You can either use unfold or unfold, camera based, or planar. All those options will work. I believe I use unfold. That worked perfectly reasonable for me. Make sure to scale them up so we prevent any stretching or any deformation when we apply our textures. Right, now if you see that blue area, that's where we need to put our unwrap. So first things first, I'm going to put the screen in direct center, probably scale it down a little bit, just move it around. Just try and make it as fit as much of the space as possible. And we want to do that because let's say you have a texture that is 4K. Now if it's 4K and you're trying to put a texture on something that's really small on the UV, which again is an image, it's not going to be as detailed as it would be if it took up a much larger space on the plane. So let's say you want to get some really fine dust details or something on there, then it needs to take up as much space on the UV space, just so it has more pixels to work with when you actually apply your texture to it. Now again, because of what we did earlier with the materials, with the material setup where the holes and plane and the actual screen have different materials, we are just going to line these up. It doesn't matter if they overlap. I'm just going to try and make these as straight as possible. Again, it doesn't matter if they overlap. The screen is separate to the holes, but the buttons and the actual rest of the object are all together, so they can't overlap. Now this will become a bit more apparent when I show you how to start texturing in Substance Painter, because as you'll see, they are separated into whatever material I put them in Arnold. So the body is a standard blend material, and then the whole area is a separate material, and the screen is a separate material, and those will show up separately in Substance Painter. So when you're actually texturing, you'll only be texturing whatever affects that part of the model. So it'll become a little bit more apparent. But just scale up these buttons so they take up a little bit more space, and then once you've done that, save your model and then click on File, Export, and export the standard view of it. So if you press 1 on the model, export that model as an FBX file, and then if you go into the smooth view and by pressing 3, export that model as well, and then export it as a FBX file, but label it _high at the end as a suffix. Alright, now we're going to start the texturing phase. Now, the software I'm going to use is Substance Painter. You can use other software like Mari or Photoshop, but I'm going to use Substance Painter, and that's what I'm going to show you how to texture with. So the first thing you want to do is click File, Open, and select your model, and click OK. And now if you see here, all of our textures are put into separate planes. Each of these is about a 4K map, or whatever resolution you set it as, but I'm going to be exporting it in 4K. So it's going to be a 4K map. You want to use a PBR metal roughness shader. Turn up the ambient occlusion, disable subsurface scattering and parallax occlusion mapping. Tessellation, that's entirely up to you, but we are going to be using it for this model. Do enable shadows because we'll want to see how our lighting affects our model. Also be mindful of performance, as this software can get a little intensive when you have especially high quality models and textures enabled. So first things first, we need to choose a HDRI map. We want to work in a neutral color space, because if it's a neutral color space, we know what actual colors we're doing. Now, one of the problems is if you try to use like a forest HDRI map, it'll have this green tint to it, because that's the way the lighting works in the forest. There's always this green atmospheric effect. So we don't want that. We don't want any tint to the model. We want it to be as clean as possible, black and white colors mainly, in a neutral setting, very much studio lighting. Alright, now what you see here is we're going to do baking. So select your high poly model and select all of those that I have ticked except the ID map. Bake in 4K, set the anti-aliasing mode to subsampling, the maximum subsampling rate. Make sure you have a G in preferences. There should be a setting to enable both GPU and CPU for baking. GPU will make this much faster. So bake, click bake, and then we just wait as long as it takes. This will take a while. I just cut straight to once it's finished, and you should get all these maps, and that should help for a couple of things. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a fill layer, right click it, and then click add black mask. And what that will do is allow us to create an alpha mask, which we can then add our textures. Now if you look at the top right in the drop down menu, I change it to mask so I can see exactly what I'm painting. I think over here I'm painting the buttons. So once you've done the mask for the buttons, which is essentially on the left side, click wireframe, and then you can literally just drag and or double click any of the polygons, and it'll create a mask around them. Once you've done that, you can change the color in the fill layer settings, the roughness, the metallic, the normal, and how deep the ambient occlusion should be. Now we're essentially going to spend a lot of our time masking and working with and changing these parameters here. So after we've done this, we're going to do the rest of the body by making some masks and just tuning up the colors. Now again, if you see that little color bleed around the edges, that's just because of the low resolution map that we're working in. Since I would like to, since for performance sake, I'm editing this in a 1080p map. So a 1K map, that's 1024 by 1024. If I work in 4K, it's quite taxing on your hardware. So it's always best to work at a lower resolution, and then before you export, or once you're ready to see, that's when you turn it up to whatever resolution you plan to export at, just so you can see whatever colors. So the color bleeding shouldn't really matter too much as of now. So next we're going to add another fill layer, add a black mask to it. and then we're gonna do the same thing again, paint on that mask and paint whatever areas that we see that need to be a different color. I think in this case we're painting the front green area, except because my actual one is black and white. For me, the color is going to be black. For you, you can change it to whatever color you want. Also, if you see, I did change it to red later on down the line. That's just because it's easier just to see in a bright red, so I know what's being masked and what's also which parts of the color are bleeding over to the which part of the wireframe.
with certain opportunities. They won't let me get away, but they show me we're the same. We're the same. We're the same. They show me that we're the same. I can't give in. How I'm giving, it's not a state of mind. I'm not
Now, if you remember, on the actual model there's a little screw. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a normal map with a bit of displacement mapping on it, just to create the screw instead. We could have modeled it, but there really wasn't a need to when it wouldn't be seen, and we could generally just get it done with the normal map instead, and receive a roughly same effect. Again, the blurriness doesn't really matter because it'll be cleaned up once it'll look a lot smoother once we turn up the resolution. So just straighten this out, play with the parameters a bit, and then after you've done that, that should work perfectly fine. Alright, now for the holds on the side. We're doing something a little different. We're going to be using something called a height map. Now when we use the height map, what it does is that it will create polygons in whichever space that we're in. We'll create polygons on that model, and then on that model it will either move up or down whatever parts of it are selected. So as you see here, I'm trying to move them inward so we can get these holes made instead of actually modeling them. Now there's benefits and drawbacks to this. The drawback to this, it's very performance heavy, so you don't want to use it in any real-time situations, but since we're rendering it in Arnold, it shouldn't be too bad. And on top of that, what is good about this is it doesn't mess with topology or edge flow at all, so we can generally do whatever. We can make a height map for about anything, but the problem with height maps is they only go up or down. There is no left or right toward the height map. So in this case, it's going down based off where it is in the world space or the UV space. And as we see here, the holes are going inwards. They're casting shadows. They're acting and behaving how a hole would act and behave towards light. So that's how we're getting around modeling any holes, as I mentioned earlier.
love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word. No, I love it even if I never say the word.
We are going to start on the actual screen. So there's a bunch of ways to add text. Here I was just looking at sizes and how big the font and size would be. But if you just want to start on the text, if you search up font in the search bar in the alpha section, that will let you type, and we are going to do that. But also we need to make sure the text lights up, so we're going to give it an emissive texture. So if you click the plus button right at the top in the screen's texture settings, and if we click plus and we click emissive, that will give us make an emissive map for our texture, and then we can just make all the text light up as needed. And we can also change the intensity of that within Arnold or whatever render engine you use. Alright, if you finish the model, then what you do is turn all the texture settings all the way up to the max or whatever resolution you're going to export it at. I'm turning it up to 4K, and then click File, Export Textures, select the folder, and then export it in 4K. Alright, now coming back to Maya, we're going to set up the materials. So first off, for the body, we're going to apply a standard surface material, and as you see I've already done it. So get the AO map and the base color map. After you find out wherever you saved it, for me it's all in these folders right here, just drag and drop them in. So the AO and base color map are connected to a multiply node, which can be made by holding right click and clicking create node, and type in multiply, and it's AI multiply. That's the node that you're looking for. It doesn't matter which input your ambient occlusion or base color goes into, just connect them up and then connect them to the base color map input node on the actual shader. Now on the roughness, again, make sure the color space is set to raw and connect to the specular roughness. Same goes for metallic, and the normal map as well, make sure it's raw. For the normal map, again, you want to create a node called bump 2D, so just type in bump 2D, it's the top one that you want, click that, attach it, and then make sure in the use as section, set it as tangent space normals. After that, connect it to the normal camera, and then you're done. Now this, again, very simple setup, exactly the same as the other one, except this time I'm going to be using a displacement shader to make the holes. To do this, get your height map, so just drag and drop it in like I'm going to do. Yep, now that you have it dragged in, just simply connect the alpha to the displacement shader, set the color, make sure the color space is correct, and you have the exact settings that I have there. Now for the screen, it's not too complicated, it's only a little different for the emissive textures. Make sure they're on raw and they're connected exactly to where it shows on my shader. Again, we want it to be on raw, so we have accurate colors, exactly the same as everything else. We're not going to use any displacement mapping for this. Now we essentially attach that to the model, and that's what we get. Now this will work in the normal view or the smooth view, so you can switch between that to one of three. Now if you want to enable tessellation, which we do need to do, copy those exact settings and go to exactly where you need to go to do that. Now, just to show you exactly what tessellation does, now you see in the viewport, those three holes are completely flat. Now, doing a quick render, you will see, once it comes up, that the holes actually go in without us having to actually model any holes or do anything that might ruin our topology. See, they cast shadows, they do exactly as they did in Substance Painter, and we have holes that actually work and they do not mess around with our topology in any way, and we have good edge loops around that. Now it'll work the exact same for the other side as long as you set the material. Now for the final render, I created a camera, added a HDRI map by clicking on Skydome Light, and then clicking on color and then adding your HDRI map in. I downloaded mine from HDRI Haven, or you can make your own. There are various ways you can do that. Now, I took the picture on the image plane, which can be made by clicking on the camera, by making a camera first off, and then once you're on that camera, creating an image plane. It will give you the option to when you first spawn in your camera. Also, make sure I have changed the settings of my camera, just because the settings that I took of my from my phone on the photo and matched it up. You can mess around with depth of field and everything else. That's entirely up to you, but I'm just going to leave it plain. I'm also leave the camera type in perspective. There's no need to do that, just sort of change the camera in the viewport to whatever it is. So I'm just going to leave it on camera 1, which is my main rendering camera. Now for the flooring. Floor, we're going to just create a plane by holding shift right click and clicking a plane, or doing it from the poly modeling menu. Now you want to add an AI shadow matte material to this. You don't need to do anything to it, just the default material. Just enable it and use the following settings. You can change these if you want, it's entirely up to you, but this is just so we get a nice soft shadow when we render out the model. That'll give us, and since Arnold is a ray tracer, we'll get good umbra and penumbra shadows, and we have quite a lot of control for them. Now I'm just going to show you a couple of the HDRIs I have. I'm going to be using that one though. I'll probably put a link in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. Also, for the camera, make sure that its setting is set to 0, just so it doesn't show up in the background when we're rendering. Since we don't need it at all, it's not going to be useful for us. So when we set it to 0, we're still rendering the lighting data, but we're not rendering the actual image, which is what we want. Now this image plane, again, just choose whichever image you want. I'm just going to use the PNG that I took off my phone. And then after you've done that, that's pretty much all you need to do, and then you can start to render. Now, so this is the render of the actual model. This is in the smooth view, and this is just a standard model without any of the back plate. Next, here is the ambient occlusion path for the model. It's in this part, you can just mainly see the curvature of the model. Next here we have the wireframe. This is a low poly wireframe without any of the tessellation onto it. Right? Now this again is a low poly wireframe in the one view with the tessellation on it, when we actually tessellate it to create them holes. This is a high poly model in the third view with tessellation. It's a lot denser in poly count. And again, after this, when we fully render it out, this is the final render. I think it's done pretty well. It looks pretty good and it's pretty convincing. The only thing that could be done is probably color correct it. Hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. See you next time.